we have made it to the conclusion. This is the last sermon to finish out Mark 5. Once again, I am in the batter's cleanup position. I think I'm going to have to talk to management soon. But listen, we've been fleshing out, right? We've been fleshing out themes that can be seen in chapter 5. We looked at permission, the permissions Jesus gave, and the permissions he withheld throughout his encounters with the demon-possessed man and the demons, the woman whose faith compelled her to touch the garment of Jesus in the crowd, and the Jewish leader with his sick little girl that died while Jesus was making his way to her. And we examined how Jesus is the one who determines our use. He determines our use. As Mark shows how Jesus uses those he calls for what he desires. And we've examined all this against the backdrop of our wants and our needs, right? How they're sometimes confused and misidentified, and how our true and our ultimate need is to be at the feet of Jesus. All of that should sound pretty familiar at this point. And now, to finish our series, what we're going to do is we're going to explore one more theme in chapter 5. It's the theme of, wait for it, timing. Timing. We are going to explore the timing of Jesus in chapter 5, and I'm telling you this now because I want you to be looking for this. I want you to put on glasses so that you are observing the timing that's taking place in our explorations this morning, and again, against that backdrop of wants versus needs. All right. But first, it's 1982. Everybody knows 1982, right? I'm sure most people here have a vivid memory of 1982. Well, maybe not, but that's all right. We're going to start by using the Wayback Machine. We're going to 1982 because it was a very important year for my family. I graduated from college. Having met the love of my life the year previous, I got married in 1982. And my wife and I, we moved to Oregon, which was a mere 3,000 miles away. And why did we do this? We did this because I was to attend seminary, right? And Donna, my wife and I, we are firstborns. We are very responsible. We have a plan. Very quickly, we intended to hold off having children, right? Until 3 years, I finished my Master of Divinity, and I get established as a pastor, right? Good plan, right? That's responsible. This is what firstborns do. Now, keep in mind that these are not knowingly in any way selfish wants of ours, right? We believe that this was the path that God wanted us to pursue, and so we were pursuing that. And to be fair to myself and everybody here, we all have to create this sorting out in our lives, the needs and God's will and our wants and how those align or don't. We all have to do that. Now, I know I just started it, but let's leave that lovely story, and we're going to circle back later, and we're going to pick that up. Now, we'll start our exploration in Mark 5 by examining Jesus' encounter with the demon-possessed man. We've been talking about that in this series. He's a Gentile, and he's in Gentile territory. Jesus arrives. He wades into the Gentile country, into the graveyard, into the pig farm, into the presence of the demon-possessed man, and thus the demons, into the unclean. In this series, we've talked before, Jesus was here for this man. He is here for this man. The demons are done. Tormenting this man, it's over. Jesus is here to claim and redeem this man. And this is an examination of God's timing in all of this. Now, what's important to understand about the timing of this, or really any timing of God in our life? For example, why does God not act when I want him to? We need to understand the Greek word for time or timing. Kairos. It can be translated to time or season, but the depth of the word refers to that things come to a head for the full advantage of its suitable timing. That is the perfect fit, or the perfect fitting. This man's time for suffering, it's over. It's reached its conclusion. Jesus has arrived, and he's come to claim this man for himself to the glory of God. There was a time that this man was tormented, and he tormented those around him. On that day when Jesus arrived, it was time for all of that to be over, for the man to be delivered, claimed by Jesus, for all in this region to witness the ending of the torment and the beginning of the redemption. Mark 5:2. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. The word immediately, or without delay, at its root meaning, its timing was the direct path from God's point A to God's point B, and it avoids all the unnecessary. Why? Why was it the time then? Why, in the next verse, do we see that the demons immediately begged Jesus to stop tormenting him? It's because of the presence of Jesus. He is actively ushering in the kingdom of God in that very moment. The presence of the Most High God has arrived. He stepped out of the boat. This is a royal visit. This is what the word presence means. The one with ultimate authority has arrived in his fitting time. God determined the timing of these things. But in this passage and in this story, do you know whose timing hasn't come? It's those who witnessed the very miracle. Mark 5:14 through 17, the herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. They want Jesus to leave. This isn't really what we would expect that would meet their needs, right? But that's okay. This is why Jesus sends the demon-possessed man out to preach into the Gentile region. While this man wants to go with Jesus, right, which is understandable, that's not the need. And the presence of Jesus and the time that he spent with this man was all about sending him out. Jesus has a different use for him. The timing is right for him to go into his region, to share and testify to the Gentiles all that the Lord did for him and the compassion and the mercy that Jesus extended to him. Jesus sent him for those like the herdsmen. The herdsmen right now want Jesus gone. They're afraid. Now is not their time. Jesus knows the right time, the right fitting, the season in which they will be fully confronted with the revelation of who Jesus is. It could be when the healed man preaches in Decapolis, but it might be at the feeding of the 4,000, or as the gospel ascends on the Gentiles, or it could even be on the judgment day. Whenever it will be, this is what we need to know. It will be in the right timing. And this is why Jesus leaves. It's not the right time. It's not their time. Well, now it's 2016. 2016. God has placed on my heart the desire to fulfill an invitation that's 30 years old. My best friend from college, who established an international evangelistic ministry with church planting, he's wanted me to go with him for 30 years. And for some reason, God has put it on my heart to go in 2016. I call him instantly. We're going to go to Ghana. Ghana, okay. Never been off the continent, but all right. That's where I'll go first. Ghana, okay. Now, if you want the really full version of any of these stories, you just need to come over for a barbecue, and I'll fill you in on the evening fire, but I'm going to give you the shorter version. So I'm there, I'm being blessed, it's spiritually productive, other people are being blessed, but then the reason that I'm there, that I'm really there, starts to come up. I get this communication from Rick, and it's a communication because he can't reach me, but it somehow gets an email to somebody else who gets it to me. I still, to this day, don't understand how it happened. But it did, late at night, and Rick is telling me that Josiah, who's going to be born soon, there's a problem with his heart, and he's going to need heart surgery as soon as he's born. Man, I'm just devastated. I don't sleep much that night. I bring it to Pastor Alex. We're with a church in remote parts of Ghana on the coast. And we're with this small group in this church, and Pastor Alex is leading us. And I bring this to him. It's like, wow, we're going to pray. He gathers everybody together. He gathers our small group. And we're all going to pray. And he started praying and preaching and praying and preaching. It went on for a while. I will never forget what Pastor Alex said. And this is how I remember it. Oh God, we know it is no accident that you have brought Brother Dave here so far away from home to be with us in this place and at this time of need. God's timing was so evident to me. He sent me to Ghana in that exact year out of 30 years of being invited to go. And he sent me in that exact week when this information came available. And where was I? I was with this group in Africa. God's timing was palpable. And God set into motion a miracle to take place. Pastor Alex, after gathering the group, he's preaching, and he prayed that God would give Josiah a new heart and confound the doctors. and bring glory to God. And do you know what? That's exactly what happened. Josiah was born. The doctors checked him out. They didn't understand it. They were totally confounded. They didn't understand how it happened, but his heart was just fine. Let's go back to Mark. And Mark opens with a clear demonstration of God's timing, which carries over to the miraculous healing of the bleeding woman and her timing for her needs and how it interlocks with one of the religious leaders and his need for his little girl. Jesus was approached by one of the rulers of the synagogue that his daughter was at death's door. Mark 5:22-23. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." Remember that Jairus is an important individual in this community, and yet how does he approach Jesus? He falls at his feet, as did the demon-possessed man. He comes to Jesus, falling at his feet with this huge need to have his daughter healed and to have his daughter lived. And this leader believes that Jesus has the power to heal his daughter. So he implores Jesus to come and heal her. He is desperate. Again, this is where we need to be. We need to find ourselves at the feet of Jesus, bringing our needs to him and expecting that Jesus will meet every one of those needs in his perfect timing. But that's not so simple, right? We know it's not so simple as it sounds. Often it's our wants that hinder us from seeing our needs. The primary need is Jesus. We want to strive for a merging of our wants with God's desires, but it's the action of fixating on Jesus that separates our self-serving wants from our true needs. It's similar to Jesus sorting the wheat and the chaff. Our wants will be more transformed and align to reflect God's desire for us as we are abiding in Jesus. And the self-serving wants, well, they'll slowly fall away. But it takes a lifetime, doesn't it? Jesus goes with his Father. The crowd is following, and along the way comes the bleeding woman who believes that Jesus can heal her and end her years of suffering, much like the years of suffering for the demon-possessed man. And she just wants to touch Jesus' garment in passing, and she's hoping to go unnoticed. But that doesn't happen. And Jesus tends to this woman's need and delays his progress to make it to the Father's little girl, who is in such great need. And so we have the desired timing of the Father, desperate to have Jesus arrive in time to save his little girl, the desired timing of the disciples, and them wanting Jesus to impress and show this important Jewish leader. And the desired timing of the woman in the crowd to not be noticed in a place that she doesn't belong in order for her suffering to end. And then there is Jesus' timing. He knows. He knows. And he is following the will of the Father, which is his very mission on earth. God's timing is perfect as he weaves the huge tapestry of his story out of history. We see the unsightly and even ugly slubs of the tapestry from the back side. But God sees the front side and how it glorifies him. So Jesus' journey to the Father's house is delayed. And even while Jesus is speaking to the woman in the crowd, they come from the Father's house to tell him the bad news that his daughter has already died. And then the suggestion is made that we don't really need to bother Jesus anymore about this. But Jesus, he overhears this, and he speaks to Jairus, and he asks him to have faith and believe, to suspend his fear over this horrific news, and trust Jesus' timing as perfect. They arrive. In Mark 5:38, they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. This is a reference to the inclusion of professional mourners. This was cultural for mourners to be hired at times like this. Now, Jairus is a prestigious man, and his household is being managed by someone else. His wants are being assumed for him, as we would expect. But Jairus bringing Jesus is what is unexpected. So Jesus here, he engages the mourners. Mark 5:39-40, and when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Now, remember, these are professional mourners, so they aren't necessarily mourning. And so they can transition quickly and immediately. And they mock Jesus by laughing at him. They clearly don't understand the presence of Jesus. R.C. Sproul has this clever way of pointing this out. In the presence of Jesus, the Lord of life, death is no more irreversible than sleep. And you realize Jesus wasn't up against a clock. He had no deadline, right? It was always the right timing because it's in the power of God to supply and meet our needs. And as always, these things are pointing out exactly who God is. And in this moment, who Jesus is. Jesus spoke the universe into being. Do you imagine that it was hard for him to bring back a dead girl? Or more importantly, do you imagine that it's difficult for Jesus to meet the needs you have in your life? So Jesus sends them all away. As a matter of fact, Jesus doesn't even continue to the Father's house earlier with the crowd or all the disciples. Jesus doesn't want a large body of witnesses, and so it's just a small party that arrives at the house. Only the mother and the father and the few that are with Jesus, they go in to see the girl, where Jesus takes her hand and he simply says, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately she does so without any fanfare. She just gets up and she walks. Mark 5:42, and immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. Immediately. From God's point A to God's point B. Arise, and the girl is up and walking. Once again, it's Jesus' timing. Jesus knew when he wanted to arrive at the side of the little girl. Everyone else was pressing for Jesus to arrive just in time before she died. But Jesus wasn't concerned about that parameter at all. He knew that the Father wanted to bring this girl back from the dead, not just heal her illness so that she could live. Why? Well, that seems to be above our pay grade. We aren't told why. But ultimately, does this specific why really matter? God was glorified. All right, now it's 2021. Not so long ago. I'll bet you everybody here does remember 2021, right? So 2021 was a mere 3 years after I donated my right kidney to my youngest brother. And this story of the little girl, it reminds me of my own journey to save my brother from a lifetime of dialysis due to kidney failure. Many of you already know about this kidney donation back in 2018. I sometimes think, oh, this was my David and Goliath, right? It was big, it was dramatic, and I got to be the hero. I was on this mission to get this transplant to happen before he had to start dialysis. And I was pretty persistent about it. But the story of the little girl doesn't remind me of that part back in 2018. Remember, it's 2021. And my brother has contracted cancer. He's even had the cancer go into remission. And this is during the pandemic. You remember the pandemic. And his cancer treatment, of course, left his immune system shot. Yet, still he never contracts COVID-19. But of course, my brother isn't going to die of cancer. That doesn't make any sense. Not after all the effort and the hurdles that we overcame to bring this transplant about. I was almost aged out of being allowed to be to donate my kidney, right? It was just under the wire. It didn't make any sense to me, none, that God would allow cancer to take him. And guess what? My other brother agreed with me. It didn't make any sense either. It's like, God's not going to do that. I'm like, yeah, no. Totally convinced this is not how my brother Mark would die. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. It turns out that God's timing did not align with what made sense to me. The cancer returned, and Jesus called my brother home in 2021, 3 years after the kidney transplant. Guys, I had this all figured out. It was just like the synagogue ruler, Jairus. He had this figured out too. We're going to get Jesus, we're going to bring him to my little girl, and she's going to be healed, and she's going to live. I had it figured out. I had a plan to save my brother. But in the end, my plan and timing, it didn't align with God's planning at all. It didn't align with his timing. And I had a really hard time accepting that. I found myself struggling. That it was God's desire to call my brother home at the age of 55 years old. Who puts this stuff in my sermons? Now, back to the Gospel of Mark, not my brother Mark. Chapter 5 could have ended on the high note, right? I mean, think about it. Overemphasize the spiritual, the miraculous, the healing of the little girl that took place in raising her from the dead. But it doesn't. It doesn't end that way. The crowd was sent away. The mourners were sent away. Only the inner circle of disciples were permitted to go into the house. And while the few that were still there were amazed, Jesus then strictly charged them that no one should know. Mark 5:43, and he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Contrast that with the demon-possessed man, okay? He was instructed to go into his region and tell everyone what the Lord had done for him and the compassion and the mercy that Jesus showed him. However, no one was to know about the miracle of raising the girl from the dead. Jesus has completely different timings for these two huge miracles. And who is to know about what he has done when? It was time for the Gentiles, so he sent the demon-possessed man who had been healed. It was not time for the Hebrews because it was not Jesus' time to go to the cross. If the Hebrews had known that Jesus had resurrection power before his time had come, they would have crucified him then and there. The cross, the Father's sacrifice of his Son, was immediate and appropriate in its season. The epicenter of history when Jesus' work on the cross was finished, was perfect and exact in its timing. You and I, we must come to trust God's timing, even when we don't like it or we don't understand it. God is sovereign, and his timing in our lives and everyone else, everywhere else, is part of his sovereignty. God is always revealing who he is. Now, a huge note. There have been 3 big miracles in chapter 5, but it ends on the most basic need. And we should be paying close attention to that. Give her something to eat. Did you catch this before? Give her something to eat. The chapter ends with this. There are tons of basic responsibilities that God has given to us that we need to take care of, and there's always time and a place when we just need to take care and focus on these basic responsibilities that God has given us, the needs God has given us responsibility over. The father and the mother, they were amazed, right? But now is the time to tend to your daughter who is alive again. Give her something to eat. Instead of trying to figure out timing and trying to figure out what God is up to and spending so much time theorizing and trying to know God's timeline, we need to slow down. We need to slow down, and we need to realize that responsibilities are a part of what God has for us. For instance, taking care of ourselves, taking care of our children, if God's bestowed us with children, taking care of the immediate, which presents itself to us, and taking care of what God has put right in front of us. Think of my own personal stories this morning. Things were put in front of me. Pastor Alex praying as soon as he heard this news. My brother's kidney failure. It came on suddenly. I had to make a decision. No one planned for these things. They weren't part of my dreams or aspirations. God put them in front of me. Suddenly, abruptly, there they were. Now, for parents in the room, you can relate to this better, but let's just take having children and taking care of children. Awesome experience with awesome responsibilities. And raising our children, we're raising a future adult, and it doesn't happen overnight. Just as we need to rely on God to meet our needs, we have been placed as parents in this unique position to emulate the care and nurture of God, reflecting it into our children's lives. Our children are born dependent on us. It's a physical dependence, and it's also an emotional dependence. And ultimately, their experience with us as parents, it will impact the way they relate to God. There's something to keep you up at night. Raising our children requires us to take care of the people right in front of us. The people that God has given to us to be responsible for. It requires endurance, sacrifice. It requires us to live for the long term. It's rarely glamorous. How about never? And requires us to repeatedly put their needs to the forefront. It's doing the little things. It's showing up. It's being present and available, both physically and emotionally, over a long period of time. And then it's over. And they're adults. Oh no. We're back to 1982. We should probably finish this story. So, God laughed pretty hard. You remember, firstborn's responsible plan, hold off having children. Yeah. So, first, God spared me from getting through seminary and becoming a pastor because that's not what he made me to do. I got it wrong. And he helped me see, only after 3 years of waiting when I was supposed to be done, but he helped me to see that I was supposed to be doing something very different and to become a psychologist. And that has been a huge blessing. But if I had waited and held off to have children, I didn't finish graduate school for 13 years from there. 13, not 3. So what happens instead? We don't even get to decide that or change our minds. We are pregnant 6 to 8 weeks after getting married. 6 to 8 weeks. Yeah. So that didn't work, and God laughed at that. But it was God's timing, right? God was like, well, first, you're not going to be a pastor, and it'll take you a little bit of time to figure that out, but you're just not going to progress through seminary because I didn't take out any loans. So it turns out if God doesn't give you the money and you don't take out loans, you can't pay for anything. And secondly, Dave, we're going to start a family. And I'm going to put these people right in front of you. And you're going to start taking care of them. And this is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to be responsible for. To take care of the physical and the emotional needs of the children that I bring to you. We all have time, right? And what we do with our time is our responsibility. Rather than spending enormous amounts of time hungering for those big miracles we want to see, right? The God proof, lost and wanting God revealed in big ways in our personal lives, which subconsciously this could be equivalent to being a co-star. Instead, what we can do is we can treasure being obedient to tending to the responsibilities that God has put right in front of us. This doesn't mean pinballing from every need and fulfilling our wants to be needed. No, we're not talking about an unhealthy direction. It is being steadfast in the character of Christ over people and moments that God has entrusted to us. We have to be able to trust God's timing. It's perfect. It's unknowable. It's not something that we can control. This should teach us to be patient over time and patient with our responsibilities. We don't have to chase the next big thing. We really don't. If we're living in Christ and we're abiding in Jesus, we are finding ourselves over and over at the feet of Jesus, trusting He will meet our deepest needs. He will make these things known to us in His perfect time. I want you to think about kingship, our perspective here. We could be chasing the mountain experiences, the high experiences, right? But we're purposefully focused on what could be contrived as smaller responsibilities, But these are the acts of nurturing because we are focused on activating others into the kingdom work of activating and nurturing others, meeting people one-on-one where they are. Our passion is to equip for the everyday, nurturing the next generation to nurture their next generation. Bless, eat, learn. It's not just a slogan. It's what we're striving to do. We're not looking for the next big thing. We're looking to do life together. Because this approach and this attitude trusts God to do the big things in His own time.